What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the John Carpenter review series. The review series that will never finish. Actually, I've already watched 2 of his films and I'm ready to review the next 3 of them. So we should be finishing up here in the next month or so. Nonetheless, we are back and today we're talking about one of the few first-time watches in John Carpenter's filmography for me personally, and that's Memoirs of an Invisible Man. Before I had actually just looked at a list of his filmography to make sure I knew all the movies that I was going to cover, I'd never even heard of this movie before. And that's always a bit exciting, especially with somebody that you claim is one of your favorite directors, or in John Carpenter's case, is my favorite director. There's a movie of his that I had never heard of and never seen. That's always exciting. You never know what you're going to get. Why is it that I've never heard of it before? Is it something that's really bad? Is it something that's really underrated? Is it a hidden gem? The possibilities. So essentially what this movie is about, it stars Chevy Chase and Daryl Hannah, as well as Sam Neill as the villain, and Chevy Chase is this corporate guy, goes to this company for this big meeting, this conference, and there's this computer malfunction, this lab warfare going on, and inevitably he's in this building after everybody else is evacuated. The building, as well as Chevy Chase, gets turned invisible. And so the rest of the film is him trying to not only navigate now being an invisible man, but also trying to continue his love interest path with Daryl Hannah, all the while being pursued by Sam Neill and everybody that is in charge of this company that accidentally rendered him invisible, trying to capture him so that they can study him and figure out what the fuck happened. The interesting thing about Memoirs of an Invisible Man is that aside from Escape from LA, this is the most expensive movie that Carpenter has ever made. He's always made a name for himself as being more of a low-budget director and doing a lot of things with very little resources. And more times than not, those lower budgets is where you really saw John Carpenter shine. That's where you saw some really innovative practical effects and you saw just really neat, simple concepts that were just executed really well. He was always a director that seemed to work better the more restrictions that were put on him, despite the fact that a lot of those restrictions made him very bitter towards Hollywood itself. But Memoirs of an Invisible Man was like a $40–45 million budget, and most of his other films were somewhere between 8 to 20. So after the success of Prince of Darkness, and I think They Live even more so, don't quote me on that, the studio decided to give him a bigger budget, give him in charge of a bigger concept. Initially, Ivan Reitman was supposed to do this movie with Chevy Chase, but those two could never really agree, could never get along, which seems like all of Hollywood and Chevy Chase. But nonetheless, Ivan Reitman took a bow, went away, John Carpenter came in, and now we have easily one of the most unique movies in John Carpenter's filmography, if nothing else. But really quick before we dive into the good, bad, and ugly of Memoirs of an Invisible Man, while there's no technology that exists that we know of that can turn our bodies invisible, if you need a little help rendering your personal information invisible while you search the internet, check out the sponsor of today's video, Aura. I got a question for you. Have you ever Googled yourself? If you answered no, then you're lucky enough to not have gone through the terrifying process of seeing how much of your private information is just readily available for anybody to find. And that's because the unfortunate reality is that data brokers make a fortune selling off all of your personal information to robocallers, spam sites, even the dark web, anybody that is willing to pay for all of your personal information, including where you live. Well, the sponsor of today's video, Aura, is here to help by identifying data brokers exposing your info and submitting opt-out requests on your behalf. These data brokers are legally obligated to delete all of your information if you ask them to, but they make it extremely difficult for you to do so. So just let Aura do all the heavy lifting for you. Aura also protects you while surfing online with parental controls, antivirus, VPN, password management, and even identity theft insurance, all located on one app for an affordable price. So go back to enjoying your day-to-day life and surfing online and let Aura do all the hard work to keep you safe in the process. You can either let these people continue to profit off of selling your private information, or you can go to aura.com/Cody Leach or click the link in the video description to start your 2-week free trial. And thank you so much to Aura for sponsoring today's video. Starting off with the positives, I thought that the special effects in this movie were awesome. I think that for the time, they probably looked ungodly good. They still hold up really well. And this is kind of John Carpenter doing a lot of digital effects and a lot of CGI, which he didn't traditionally do. A lot of his stuff was practical, and like I said, due to lower budgets, had to be a lot more creative. Here he had a lot more of a sandbox to play with, a lot more budget to throw around, and he yet again used that budget really well. Not only just the way that they render Chevy Chase invisible and some of the things that go along with that, and trying to visualize some of the things that happens in inside of his body, or, wrapping him up and unwrapping scenes, but even more so with things like the building that he gets rendered invisible inside, and just chunks of it are invisible. It's a practical effect and a digital effect in different scenes, and both of them look equally good. And so there's scenes where he's in a room where parts of it's invisible. You can see the outside, staircases are only halfway built, and I would just love to see a behind the scenes documentary of that sequence in and of itself to see how the hell they made a somewhat transparent building and made it look real. I also thought that some of the things that they were exploring as far as the invisibility of Chevy Chase and some of the issues that would come with that, like him eating and digesting food and seeing the food go through his esophagus and being digested by stomach acids and some other things. The invisibility trope is something that has always been around ever since the black and white Universal movies, maybe even before that. But we've seen so many iterations before and since this film, and this one does a really good job at just trying to venture into new territory and touch on some things that were always kind of taken for granted and nobody ever really stopped to think about would actually be an issue for somebody that is invisible. I thought Sam Neill did pretty good as the villain. He's not the most layered character. He's got a very one-note motivation. Corporate guy wants to capture the thing that's going to make him a lot of money or get him wildly sued. And so it's very small scale as far as his character arc and his character development, but the charm of Sam Neill comes through in a very sinister way. He's always been somebody that's played really good as bad guys, whether you're looking at Event Horizon or even something a little more recent like Daybreakers. Not a fan of Omen 3, don't mention that one. But he brings a nice little charisma to this, and it's always good to have a villain that's got some pop and some personality, especially one that doesn't have the most interesting character arc or character development. The personality of the actor is what makes that villain kind of come to life. And finally, I kind of liked the neo-noir style that Carpenter decided to use here. I mean, it's literally memoirs of an invisible man, so the whole movie is kind of told with narration and a flashback sequence through Chevy Chase's character. Something about the tone of Chevy Chase's voice and the moments they decide to use voiceover, which is quite a few times throughout the movie, it just gives that edge, almost like one of those old school detective stories. Even though there's nothing being detected here, there's no mystery to uncover, it's just the main character recanting the events of the movie for you, but it just has that flavor to it. And I think that was one of the many elements of this film that really makes it unique, not only for an Invisible Man movie, but for a John Carpenter film. Now moving on to the negatives, I wish that I could have came on here and said how awesome this movie was, or what a big surprise, or what a hidden gem this is. For many of you watching this that maybe grew up watching this film, it might be that exactly to you. For me, I was excited about the possibilities of this. I didn't really think this movie came together all that well. This is not very surprising that this was a bit of a bomb on John Carpenter's filmography, and this is a movie that I had never heard of. It's not a movie I've ever really heard too many fans come out of the woodworks talking about it. The biggest issue for me is that this movie has a serious crisis of tone. I think when you cast Chevy Chase especially, you have to have more humor. You have to have more of a tongue-in-cheek kind of approach to this story. And there's moments that it has that. Like there's literally a dream sequence where his dick is invisible and it's like a little sight gag for a moment.
Looking for something, Nick?
The movie needed more of that. You needed more room for Chevy Chase to do what Chevy Chase does. Now, I understand him as an actor. This was probably him trying to branch out of comedy and do something a little more serious and, stretch his acting chops a little bit. I don't think it works here, or at least whatever he tries to do paired with what John Carpenter was trying to do, it doesn't really show that so much. It really kind of reinforces, no, Chevy, you need to stay in comedy. But this is a movie that it just sets itself up for so many goofy scenarios, and it always has a dead serious tone, and it always plays it straight. And to me, that was the wrong tone to go for. Now, John Carpenter is on record for saying that this was a miserable production and he actually wanted to quit the business altogether after making this film. Now, you could take a shot every time John Carpenter has said that in regards to one of his movies, but it seems very believable here. He's got a quote on the Shout Factory Blu-ray that basically says that he worked directly for Chevy Chase, Sam Neill, and Warner Brothers. Like, they were the ones in charge, and it was miserable. So I really don't know where the confusion or the dick measuring contest as far as what tone this movie was supposed to be, where, who was on what side. Maybe Chevy Chase really pushed for the serious tone, wanting to break out of comedy, and everybody else was like, are you out of your fucking mind? I have no idea. Clearly, people did not get along in this film. Clearly, there were a lot of disagreements on the direction. I also never really cared about the relationship or the budding romance between Chevy Chase and Daryl Hannah. They get introduced to each other very quickly in the first act, and then she becomes somebody in the second half of the film that he very much ties himself to, and I don't know if it was the chemistry or if it was just yet another issue of the tone, but their relationship I was just never bought into. I never really cared. I never got like the warm and fuzzies about it. You know, them being together throughout the third act and him getting back together with her being the ultimate goal by the climax of the film, just, it never really excited me. And clearly nobody's very happy with the end result, being that nobody involved with this film ever talks about it in a very good light. But regardless of who did what, who said what, who wanted what, the end result is a movie that has a serious identity crisis. And while this certainly is just kind of an extension of what I started my negatives with, I just don't think the movie had a very good script to begin with. I don't think that there was enough here to make the characters pop, to make the story pop beyond the special effects and the cool, unique things they were doing with the invisibility and, you know, bringing some of John Carpenter's directing flash and style here. Everything underneath all of the flash is just kind of mundane. And so you go through the entire film and you feel like you've seen the best that it has to offer in the first 30 minutes, and it just goes for another hour plus, and you never really feel like there's something exciting or cool or even interesting as far as character development that's waiting for you for sticking throughout the entire story. So overall, unfortunately, this is going to be one of my more disappointing experiences with John Carpenter films. I don't see myself really watching this one again. It wasn't miserable to watch or anything. It was perfectly fine. I could understand some people being huge fans of this if they saw it back in the day or if they just really like the different approach that it took. But for what I come to a John Carpenter film for, or a Chevy Chase film, it just felt like I didn't really get enough of either. And because of that, it's hard for me to recommend this to fans of either Carpenter or Chevy Chase. It's just kind of a forgettable movie. Well, that's it for this one, guys. Next up, we got Village of the Damned, so please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this review series that I promise I'm going to get through here in the next month or so. I'm sorry for all the delays. Check out the playlist over here for all the other John Carpenter reviews I've done so far, and as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.